Jones molded and shaped the lunch from bits and pieces of aging food. He had gathered 2 pounds of soft potatoes, an onion as large and as damp as his fist, and a mason jar of lard that had been used but once before. He strutted back and forth, pulling the meal together from different parts of the kitchen. From far back in the icebox he produced a crock of souring milk, some beef broth from stock, and a half-shriveled section of green pepper. Sitting at the kitchen table they all watched him. That is, the children and the girl watched him, while M.C. watched the girl to see what kind of effect Jones was having on her. For it was true, Jones was a sight to see whenever he made a show of preparing his special potato soup. M.C. had eaten nothing more than half a jelly sandwich the whole morning. They were all starving, but he ignored his gnawing hunger. Grudgingly, he had to admit the way Jones could stand at the stove with Benina's apron pinned to his shirt just below the chest. He ought to look simple, M.C. thought. Jones looked like he was enjoying himself, with his sleeves rolled high and his head cocked to one side. Suddenly he would pull himself up and look proudly at them while he skillet-fried diced potatoes and chopped onion in the lard. M.C.'s stomach ached from the delicious smell of sizzling onions. They were all laughing at Jones, even the girl. Jones stirred the food just a little too far away from the skillet. The lower half of his body was turned clear to the left, while the top half of him stayed turned to the right. He had to stretch his stirring arm way over while he kept his left hand hooked in his belt. With his chin stuck out, he peered into the skillet, moaning softly with the wonder of sweet browning potatoes swimming in fat. Jones poured in some water, and a great cloud of steam rose up over the pan. "Now you're cooking up a storm," he said. The girl giggled and covered her mouth. Jones glanced at her with what was clearly friendliness. M.C. could tell. True to his word to treat her kindly, Jones had made her some coffee when she first came into the house, and because she was company, and maybe not used to patient waiting, he had prepared her a half-slice of toast from the oven. He carefully explained to her that his special potato soup took time to fix. He acted as if she had been with them forever, and right off the girl's eyes had been shining at Jones, just as though he was her own real father, or at least one she wished she had. Jealously, M.C. watched them, his sullen eyes flicking from one to the other. In spite of his anger, they softened whenever he looked at the girl. Jones had asked her straight out what her name was. And straight out she had told him when all morning she wouldn't tell M.C. "Thinks I'm a kid. Well, I know things too." She told Jones she was Loretta Outlaw, just as if she had been telling that strange name to everybody all morning long. "Loretta who?" Macy said. "Loretta Outlaw," Harper said. "Now that's got to be a true name," Jones had said. "Nobody'd want to make up a name like that." Loretta said that was why she never told it. Defiantly she turned hard eyes on each one of them at the table. For no sooner had she said outlaw, she told Jones, people laughed or thought she must be lying. "Bet they began to look at you sideways, too," Jones said. "They sure would," she said, "and make me so mad." "Don't you be shaming ever to tell who you are," Jones told her. "But it must mean that somewhere my people were—" Anxiously she looked at Jones. She busted up with the law. "Tough, touch her face and rub away the sad. I'm not asking you nothing about your background," Jones was saying, "but it seems to me outlaw can mean more than a single thing. It can just as soon mean your people got no protection from the law, so they was outside it, so to say. Way back when, how many black folks had any luck with law anyhow?" The girl's eyes were round and wide. "Sure, it could mean that," she said. "My mother once knew this teacher from New York, Manhattan, who said the New York Manhattan telephone book was full of outlaw names. Said they all lived in Harlem, Manhattan, too." "Well, that's something," Jones said. "There has to be a story in there." M.C. had heard of Harlem, heard somewhere that there was as many black people in Harlem as equaled the whole population of Cincinnati. He didn't know if it was true or not. "Wonder if it is. Wonder if I ever will see it." "So don't you be ashamed by your name, ever," Jones told Loretta Outlaw. Later now, and they still sat watching Jones perform at the stove. In spite of himself, MC warmed to Joan's easy and natural kindness, which he seemed to turn on and off at will. There were times, like right now, when the simple act of his father slicing green pepper into a skillet wasn't just a comical picture MC would remember. It reminded MC of the feeling Jones had talked about yesterday. Was it only yesterday? He recognized it now as the same feeling that would rise in his chest and in his throat when sometimes he walked into the kitchen and saw that stove. So that now it seemed that the kitchen was full of the feeling day after day of Jones and him at lunchtime. We leave, and how much of him will walk away too? Sitting there with his hunger curled hard in his stomach, MC restored his gaze always on Loretta Outlaw. She leaves, and something of me will walk away with her? Maybe she won't.